And thanks again to Iconic Offices, as always, for welcoming me with open arms. And thanks so much to you guys for coming here live to attend the event, but also if you're watching the replay, it's always a pleasure to have people watch back and engage in the content. So today we're here to talk about doing more with less. So feel free to say on the chat, hi Matthias, see you there. The topic today really came about a couple of years ago, post all of us changing over to remote working very soon after. A lot of conversations that I had with leaders would focus on this topic of now being expected to do more with less, where the expectations of their role had increased, but the resources that they had and the capabilities that they had hadn't. And so there was this differing expectation of them because of the productivity that it allowed them, that a remote work had allowed them. But then the resources that they had and the feeling of being able to cope with all of these new demands wasn't there because of the expectations of the role had changed. And so I'd love to know if in the chat, if anybody can relate to this. And maybe that's one of the reasons why you're here, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But having had these conversations, I started to identify then what can I help leaders with? And you may not necessarily be a leader joining the call today. You might be an individual contributor. Either way, hopefully you'll get some value from what I'd identified. So I helped people to identify what is it that you can control. So control the controllables. So one area is your focus. So getting really clear on your strategy, which is what we're going to talk about today. Another area is identifying the busy work that maybe doesn't need to stay on your plate. And then thirdly, learning how to delegate that stuff. So what are the tasks that you're currently holding on to that maybe don't need to stay sitting on your plate or on your table, and that you could move off to someone else with a valid reason for doing so. So we're going to look at those different areas today. But I'd love to know in the chat what brought you here today. So if you could let me know in the chat, what was your reason for coming to the session? So you might have read the ad and you thought that speaks to me in some way. There's something in particular that Aoife is going to talk about that I'd love to know more about. There might be one word that has come to your mind as I asked you that question, but I'd love you to just engage in the chat and let me know what is it that brought you here today. And we're going to be asking at different points to engage in the chat. I'll be asking questions throughout, just to ask people just to post their answers to gain more engagement and participation throughout. If you do have any questions throughout the session, then I will be doing a Q&A at the very end. So I'd ask you to hold on to those and to ask them at the end if you can do that. And so having a look in the chat, hi Simona. We're often asked to do more. Doing it with less is a life changer. Yeah, absolutely. Matthias says to learn new leadership skills, keep a growing mindset, and interact with other leaders. Brilliant. So hopefully you'll be able to do that in the chat today. Anyone else have any other reasons that they want to share for being here today? Anything else coming through? Luke says it's harder to do more without taking a mental hit. Absolutely. And I think when I talk about doing more with less, really what it's about is being more efficient. So it's not about trying to get through more of the tasks on your to-do list just to feel like you've accomplished more at the end of the day by ticking off all the tasks on the list. It's about really getting focused on the really important areas that are going to give you the most bang for your buck, that are actually going to help you to gain the most towards your goals, so your long-term and your short-term goals. I don't see any other responses coming through there, so we'll just move on. I'm going to do a quick introduction to myself before we get into the content. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Aoife Donovan Lee, and I'm a leadership specialist. So I am a training executive focused on leadership and people management and executive coaching for people in those roles. So I've been in this business for almost 16 years now. And the first 13 of those years were spent predominantly working in multinational organizations, namely Vodafone and eBay, for quite some time. And I was working across a number of people development roles within those organizations. So leadership, training and development, and coaching within those organizations. And now I'm managing my own business and I'm co-founder of a startup as well, all based around leadership development. So the startup, just to inform everybody, is we're myself and my dad are the co-founders together. So he has a number of years experience in leadership development as well. We've developed a really succinct online program for people to take at their own pace. And we've condensed 6 hot topics for leaders into 10-minute bite-sized chunks of content. So 10 minutes of content, and then you go and do some post work yourself. So we are looking for applications from organizations who would like to participate. If you think your organization might be a good candidate, give you an opportunity at the end to talk to me a little bit more about it. And so we could organize to have a chat if you feel like their managers in your organization are time strapped, time poor, but do need to develop. I'd love to chat to you about it a little bit later on. So what is in it for you today? I'm going to help you to identify and get really clear on your strategy. So where should your time be focused based on maybe your professional organizational goals or your own personal goals? So what is it that you want to achieve? And really, your day should be focused on those things that are going to bring you closer to those goals. So what are the 2 to 3 big ticket items that you should be focusing on each day, rather than focusing on the busy work? And I'm going to help you to look at a tool today to help you eliminate that fake work or that busy work, and do a calendar audit. So this is an action that I'm going to suggest to you to take away from today. And you'll see me do that a lot throughout the session, is that the session is condensed into 30 minutes. So we can't possibly do absolutely every activity. So what I normally recommend to people is that feel free to take photos of the slides, but take actions away for you to do post session, because there's quite a bit of content in this. So one of those things is a calendar audit. So looking at, once you're clear on your strategy, you know where the donkey work is, or the busy work, you know how to identify it, looking at your calendar and identifying what are the areas that I could delegate, what are the areas that could just be missed off altogether. And helping you as a leader to differentiate between the operating tasks versus the managing tasks on your plate at the moment. So the difference between the two, and actually identifying on your to-do list what's an operating task, what's a managing task, and then learning how to delegate better. So if you struggle with delegation, I have a little process to help you to manage that a little bit better. So we'll move on to looking at your strategy. So I have used this particular process for developing my goal setting and my strategy for the past 5 years. And it was given to me by my own coach, who's Kerry Lyons. If any of you are new to business or setting up a business, she's a brilliant coach in that line of work. So she introduced this to me a number of years ago, and I've used it ever since. It's been really effective. So first of all, what it's about is identifying 5 years out from now, what does success look like? And often people look at me like I've 2 heads when I start to get them to think about 5 years from now, because it can be quite difficult for people to imagine what does that look like. What I normally say to people is picture what are the elements of your life that you want to have, and what elements of your life do you want to eliminate that are happening now. And so to kind of do a stop, start, and continue on a 5-year plan. So to look 5 years into the future. For me, 5 years ago, it was certain things I wanted to have achieved, like my master's in psychology. I wanted to have a second child. I wanted to work for myself. I wanted to have flexibility in my working life. So I knew that they were elements that I wanted to have in 2022 that are happening now. I didn't know how to get there, but that was my focus. And so drilling that back or re-engineering back from 5 years down to 3 years, around the halfway point, I would suggest looking at what does that look like and writing that out in the present tense. The date is the 26th of April, and 3 years out from now, or 5 years out from now, I have, and you write out in the present tense as if you already have achieved the goal. So what does success look like at that point? And then coming back to 12 months time. So in a year's time, what does success look like? What will I have achieved? And that's going to start to help you to understand where your focus should be, whether that's your organization's 12-month goals or your own personal goals. So where do you want your focus to be? And then I suggest breaking that down into quarters. So we're now, if you work off a calendar year for your financial year in your organization, then we're into Q2 now. So for the next 90 days, what do you want to have achieved that's going to bring you closer to your 12-month, rolls up into your 3-year, rolls up into your 5-year? And if you look at that 90-day, I suggest writing that 90-day goal out every day. So I write mine out in my planner every morning, and it just keeps me focused then on what are the top 3, max 3 tasks that are going to bring you closer to that. Now, there are obviously going to be different tasks and activities that fall onto your lap that need to be tended to, that aren't part of that goal setting process. And it's about really being crystal clear on where the focus is, so that you do have that little bit of wiggle room to tackle those other quick tasks that fall into your calendar on a day-to-day basis as a leader. I'm sure they do. And then looking at week to week, if you don't already do this, does anybody do this? Actually, let me know in the chat. Do you do a weekly review, looking back over the previous week to see what, and again, I'd suggest a stop, start, continue kind of a model for this. So look at, what do I need to stop doing? What was the busy work that really didn't serve me well? Where did I spend a lot more time than I needed to, or that I should have? That I don't want to take that practice into the next week. What do I need to continue doing? So where are my successes over the previous week? What worked really well in terms of me being really effective, utilizing my time best, and creating focus towards my goals? And what was missing? I had said last week that I wanted to achieve X, Y, and Z, but I didn't go near that. And that's keeping me away from the 90-day goal. So sometimes I have to readjust my 90-day goal during a quarter, because I'm not doing the things that I'm saying I want to do each week when I do my weekly review. And that gives you a good indication of where your energy is, and maybe the goal needs to be tweaked. So this method I would suggest for starting to get really clear on your strategy. Where should your focus be? And then it's very clear every day when you've got your couple of tasks set out, you've written your goal at the start of the day, where do I need to focus my time? Then anything else that arrives onto your desk, you need to put a question mark over. Does this really need to sit with me? Is this something that's going to move the needle towards those goals that I said I wanted to achieve? And ask yourself those really hard questions and decide what needs to go, what should stay. So I would suggest taking this kind of method. Again, just feel free to take photos of the slides. You will get a copy of these slides afterwards. Saoirse send them out. And it's also recorded, as Saoirse mentioned. But you feel free to take a photo of this if you want to just do this like straight away or straight after today's session. So is this useful so far? I'm going to have a quick look in the chat. Luke says no on the weekly review, but should keep me on track. Yeah, absolutely. It's something that it seems like a lot when you're looking at all of this on the screen. But once you start to bake in the time to do this regularly, it just becomes part of the norm, and you start to see the benefits of doing it and achieving milestones quite quickly. So you feel like you're being rewarded for doing it. Just having a quick look into the chat again. Having a review every Friday in terms of growth and attention on my social media channels. Brilliant, Matthias. Also planning what to do the upcoming week. Absolutely. Just looking to the week ahead. But doing that evaluation of the previous week as well is really important. Thanks, Matthias. Simona, totally useful. Thanks, Aoife. Thanks, Simona. Sarah, I have a weekly task list, but I never do a retrospective weekly review. Good tip. Great. So something's been learned so far. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so we're going to move into that to-do list now. So I'm going to ask everyone now. I want us to do a quick brain dump. Like, we're going to just take probably like 60 seconds or less, just to dump down on a piece of paper. Hopefully you have a notepad and pen there, or even if you just take out your phone and just use your notepad on your phone, and just make a list of everything that's on your to-do list right now. So anything that has to be done today, personal or professional. It could be collect dry cleaning, or it might be send that email, but also longer term stuff. So what's sitting on your to-do list for a long time, like that development program or that training program that you want to engage in, or building on your public speaking, if that's something that needs to form part of your role at some point, or networking. If you know that networking is important at some point, it's not sitting on your desk right now, but it's on the longer term to-do list, then dump that down. I want you just to write everything out. We'll just take another few seconds for people to do that. And I'm going to show you in a moment a time management matrix for making a little bit more sense of that to-do list and looking at what should stay on it, what's important, what's not important, and what should probably go or maybe be farmed out if you can to someone else. Okay, so we'll wrap up that part of the exercise. Now, hopefully you do have a notepad and pen to help you do the next part of the exercise. I'd like you to just take a fresh sheet of paper and draw a quadrant onto the page. So just divide the page in two, drawing a vertical line from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, and then draw a horizontal line splitting the page directly across the middle. And you should end up with a quadrant. Everybody good? Good to go? We're going to move into this now. So this is not my model. It is stolen with pride from Stephen R. Covey. Anybody heard of him? So he wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that's where I've taken this from. First came across this from a brilliant manager back in my Vodafone days, many years ago in my early 20s. He introduced me to this book. I'd really recommend the book. There's loads of other pieces in it that would help you as a leader, but certainly this time management piece forms part of it. That's really, really useful. So if you see the way he's divided out that quadrant, so he's divided it into 4. So you can see in the top left quadrant, he's got quadrant 1, and he's labeled that important and urgent items. So I'd love you to label your own quadrant in the same way that Stephen Covey has here. Quadrant 2 over in the top right is important but not urgent. Important but not urgent. And then bottom left is quadrant 3, and that's not important, not important but urgent. And then quadrant 4 is not important, not urgent. So if we have a look at the first quadrant, these are crises. These are those really pressing matters that land on your desk that need to be attended to, or deadline-driven projects. So they need to be done. Your manager drops something on your desk today and says this needs to be done for tomorrow. So maybe everything else has to fall off the to-do list for the rest of the day. And looking at quadrant 2, these are those longer term plans. So they are important, but they're not urgent. So things like relationship building or the networking that I mentioned, finding new opportunities, long-term planning. So you can see the types of examples that he has there. So they are items that are important and not urgent. And then in quadrant 3, items that are not important but urgent. They're urgent to someone, they're not urgent for you, and they're not important for you. So these are things like interruptions, someone just landing up at your desk, or if you're still working remotely, an interruption, a call or an email, other popular activities that just land in unexpectedly and they're not important for you. They have a sense of urgency about them. And then finally in quadrant 4, items that are not important and not urgent. These are trivia, busy work, fake work, things that seem like you're doing something, you're being productive, but you're not, because they're time-wasting activities. They're activities that are not important to you. They're not urgent. They're not bringing you closer to that goal. They're not aligned with your strategy. So things like maybe social media browsing as well. So let's have a look at your to-do list that you wrote out a few minutes ago. I want you to start to bucket your activities into the 4 quadrants. So things that are pressing that need to be done probably today or this week are your urgent. Things that are more longer term are in quadrant 2, like relationship building, and you have other examples there. Quadrant 3 are the interruptions, probably not sitting on your to-do list, but possibly some kind of an email that's maybe it's urgent and it's important for someone else, but maybe they've dumped it onto you and it's now urgent for you, but it's not actually important to you. It's not going to bring you closer to your goals. And then quadrant 4 is the trivia and busy work. So another way of looking at this, if you look at the screen here, is quadrant 1 you want to manage. Quadrant 2 you need to focus on. So you do need to build time into your calendar to have some focus on these particular activities. Quadrant 3 should be avoided because they're not your emergency. So minimize your investment in these activities. And then quadrant 4 is to limit your investment of time in these activities. So these are entertainment, probably could be used for entertainment purposes like the social media scroll. You could look at some of these activities though as stress busting. So maybe sometimes allowing yourself some social media time is necessary. So it's just always checking in with yourself though. When is this important to me to do? And when is it just time wasting? When am I procrastinating? So the way I look at my week is anytime that I have my kids minded, anytime the childminder is in the house, that's called golden time. And that cannot be wasted on emails that could be sent later on in the day, or I'm going on a business trip in June, and I started to find myself the other day looking at planning what restaurant I was going to go to during golden time. That's a no-no. So then I just caught myself and I stopped myself and said, okay, Aoife, are you focused on your big stuff, or is that something that you could do later on in the evening when it's not golden time? So I've got golden time and fluffy time. So it's important to just identify how you're spending your time. So here I suggest the calendar audit. So if you can have a look at your calendar based on now what you know, having looked at your strategy, identified what's really important to you, having that set of tasks every day that are going to bring you closer to your goal, and now looking at what have you still got in your calendar that could be time wasting or could be delegated. So what are some of those crises items that could be delegated to someone on your team? And on that, how are you at delegating? Is that something that you struggle with? So going to move on. If you wanted to take another photo there of the screen before I move on to the next, because I am going to move us into talking about delegation. If everybody's happy to move on. Okay. So on delegating, who struggles with delegating? Let me know in the chat if you struggle with delegating. So it is handing over responsibility to another person to carry out certain activities or tasks. You hand over the necessary authority to them, but you still have final accountability. So the final accountability, the buck sits with you overall for the task, but for a time you hand over that responsibility to them to complete the task. Paul says, I find it difficult as at times when I know everyone else is busy too. Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, it's really important to identify your reasons for delegating, so that when you are finding that a challenge, that you go back to those reasons. Why am I delegating this? Is it important for the person who I'm delegating to? Is it going to be good for their development? Is it important for my own sanity that I need space in my calendar? Simona says, sometimes I find it hard to delegate when I'm unsure about the results other people may deliver. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, for a lot of people, it's relinquishing that control over the quality of something. But there is a process that you can follow that I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes that will hopefully help you with that. So Matthias says, it depends on what it is. Yeah, it depends on what you're delegating. Some things are easier to delegate than others. Absolutely. If it's a meatier task, it might seem like a bigger chunk of work. But firstly, let's actually have a look at then some of those tasks that you should really be delegating. This is your broken Lego person. If you don't delegate, if you leave that stuff on your desk, what's that going to do for yourself? So relating back to Paul's comment, thinking about your why. Why are you delegating these particular tasks? And it could be to give yourself that bit of space and to focus on the bigger, longer term plans. Because if you don't dedicate the time to those quadrant 2 activities, all of a sudden they start to move into quadrant 1 and they become pressing. And then everybody feels the impact of you being under pressure. So as a means of alleviating pressure in the future, then how can you start to spread the workload and introduce it to your team in that way? So let's have a look at some of those tasks that you don't delegate. Tell me in the chat, what should you not delegate? Just anything that comes to mind. What should stay with you? So what should you absolutely not delegate? And this is what I was talking about at the start, differentiating between operating tasks and managing tasks. So what on your to-do list are the operating tasks? So if we look at your to-do list, some of those tasks are operational. They are part of your role and responsibility. They are part of your responsibilities of your role, but they're operational. They're not managing tasks. They're not people management tasks that need to stay with you. So if you look at your to-do list, Maybe it's an action to take away. Put an O beside any of the ones that are operating tasks and an M beside the ones that need to stay with you. So the O is for operating, the M is for managing. And then ask yourself, if it's an operating task, why am I still hanging on to that? Is that one that could be delegated? So if I have a look in the chat now, Matthias says, tasks where my personal interactions with others are needed. Great. The team nurturing should stay with the manager. Absolutely. Yeah. So I prefer not to delegate double checks. Yeah. Final versions of anything that must be written, sent out. Yeah, absolutely. So you've given the brief for them to go off and do the bulk of the work, but then you do the checks. Yeah, absolutely. Anything that you've mentioned there, as well as things like very difficult tasks that might be a stretch too far for people, that maybe they require more training to be able to do if you do want to delegate at some point, but those more difficult, challenging tasks probably stay with you for the time being. Any grievances, disciplinaries, doling out rewards and recognition should probably come from the manager, and at the same time punishments, so disciplinary action should be done through you, and confidential matters, so things like that, or anything that could impact your own personal status should stay with you. So I'm going to give you a process then. Once you've been able to identify those operating tasks, things that you could delegate, having looked at your calendar as well, having done the audit to identify areas that could be delegated, then look at your process for delegating. So this is a 5-step process that I use for delegation and for training people up on delegation. So first of all, if you've identified the task, then define the task, the step by step. How would you approach it? Or if you've got a really high performer, you might want to coach them on the how. So help them to come up with some of the steps, but really clearly, either collaboratively or you do it yourself and deliver it to them, define the task. And then select that right team member. So this might be someone who's been identified as having the right skill set through a skills gap analysis that you've done with your team, or it might be someone who has spoken to you before about wanting more project work in relation to these particular tasks. So select the right team member and communicate it really effectively with them. I would make sure that that communication is then recapped by them as to exactly what they're doing, and then a follow-up email either by you or by them showing exactly what's going to be done. And then make sure that you've got a process in place for monitoring their progress. So you've got checkpoints in place at each stage to let them know that you're available for delivery of feedback from them, or you can deliver feedback on how you think it's going, and providing them with that regular and ongoing support. And you have that peace of mind as well as to knowing what's going on at each point. And then a final debrief. So once the task has been completed, to have a debrief meeting with them to review what went well, what could have gone better on both parts. So not just theirs, but on your part as well. So that is a handy little kind of process for delegation, giving you a little bit more control over your prep for delegating a task, and helping you to oversee the overall process as well, which will hopefully give you a little bit more comfort in handing over certain tasks. So that's our lot for today's session. So in summary of the session, what we've looked at is really helping you to get clear and focused on what's important, and then what your day looks like in terms of managing your to-do list using that time management matrix. I'd highly recommend doing an audit of your calendar as a result of that. Then looking at what's on your plate currently, what's an operating task, what's a managing task, what needs to stay with you, what can be delegated out, and then learning how to delegate better. If that's not something that you are comfortable and confident with, then look at your process for doing that. So I'd love to know in the chat what's been your key takeaway from today. So what are you going to do as a result of today? What are you going to do differently as a result of what we've discussed today, what you've learned? Any key takeaway, I'd love to know if you could pop it into the chat, something that you've taken away, something new, or maybe it's a reminder of something that you currently do that's been reinforced. So I'd love to know in the chat what's stuck with you and what you're going to take forward. I'll give you a moment just to pop those into the chat. So Simona says, especially highlight the importance of debriefing after task completed. Yeah, doing that debrief to evaluate how it's gone. Sarah will definitely do an audit of my task list. Absolutely, Sarah, that's great. And consider the types of tasks as opposed to tasks themselves. Yeah, brilliant. And Matthias, from now on, I'll create more precise long-term plans and have a retrospective weekly review. Giovanna, I'll definitely debrief. Brilliant. More plans and audits. Yeah, and banking in the time into your calendar to do it and protecting that time, knowing the importance of doing it and sticking to it. Absolutely. So thank you for those. If we're not already connected, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. My name is Aoife Donovan Lee on LinkedIn. There's my website address, my email. And if you would like to touch base on that program that I'd mentioned at the beginning of this session, so the Leadership Development Program for Time-Strapped Managers, hover your camera over the QR code now, and what that will do is bring up my calendar, and you can select a time then for us to have a chat if you'd like to see, would this be a good fit for your organization, and would we be a good fit? So I'd love to connect in.